PokeClass is sponsored by CollectorsCash.com, and they now have Dark Explorers in stock at incredible prices. Are you looking for that last card to complete your deck, or looking to boost your collection in any set of the game? Then Collector's Cash is where you need to be. They stock all of your boxes, tins, and singles of Pokemon, and any other card game for that matter, at very competitive prices. So make sure you visit www.collectorscash.com after the show. Hey everybody, and welcome to episode 80 of PokeClass, where we're going to be talking about another new deck to be born through Dragons Exalted, as the release date for the set is getting ever closer. This time is a little bit different though, as we see a brand new card revamping older decks rather than creating a brand new concept altogether, and it's all about Rayquaza EX this week. First off, let's have a look at the actual card, Rayquaza EX. This card has already been confirmed in the English set, so we're definitely going to be able to make full use of this card competitively. It's also going to be released in a tin as well. At first glance, we have ourselves a 170 HP Dragon type EX with 2 attacks, the becoming traditional weakness to Dragon, and a single retreat cost. So things are looking good so far, but let's have a look at the attacks. The first is called Celestial Roar, which costs a single colourless energy but doesn't do any damage, and the effect of the attack is that you have to discard the top 3 cards of your deck. If any of those 3 cards are energy, then you attach them to Rayquaza. So this attack is actually very mediocre in the new format, as we have lost a way to get back our item resources and we'll need to make the most of what's in the deck to be able to win the game. With supporters and key Pokemon also being possible targets for being discarded by this attack, the energy attachment advantage you could get, if you're lucky, is a risk not really worth taking. It could be a decent attack when looking for a last prize or playing sudden death, but any other time I wouldn't really recommend it. The second attack is really where Rayquaza shines and is called Dragon Blast. For a lightning and a fire energy you do 60 damage, but if you read the small print you have to choose either fire or lightning energy and discard all of them attached to Rayquaza. For each energy that you send to the discard pile this way, you do 60 damage to the active Pokemon. This attack is actually very nice indeed. You have the unlimited damage output that is reminiscent of Lost Burn, an attack that was really good back in the day, but you need to be smarter with your energy attachments to deal the correct damage, as you have to discard all of the energy you choose to fuel the attack. However, you can see that this attack can be covered by fire or lightning cost, with either of them being the main attack power, meaning that you can use one of the 2 soul energy accelerated Pokemon in the format to make this guy even more competitive. Of course, I'm talking about either Electric or Emboar that you can use to power up this powerful attack over and over, as the energy goes to the discard for use with Electric the following turns, and Emboar can pile as many energy as is available to deal huge damage and knock out anything in its path. Both of these energy accelerators are viable in the new format, so I'm going to take a look at both lists, which you can use to test with or test against to prepare for the new season. The first I'm going to look at is the Emboar version, and many of you may still be thinking that Emboar isn't the most competitive of energy accelerators, but with the format changing to a more stage 2 friendly environment, we could see Emboar back in competitive play quite soon, especially with the attackers it can fuel through its ability. Here's a quick skeleton list I put together to try and get Emboar working in the new format with an array of attackers at your disposal. This list has ended up being incredibly tight, as to be expected when fitting in a stage 2 line along with your attackers, and a way to get them out as many times as possible by staying consistent. The main line of Emboar is where we start with a 4-1-3 line of the big guy. I've chosen this for the skeleton as you don't really want to be going anything less than this, otherwise you just won't be able to get it out enough game after game, and you can always add in more if you feel like you're still struggling to get going. This is your energy acceleration of the deck, so you're going to need to get it in play as quickly as possible, and this line of Emboar I feel is the minimum you should be thinking about playing when building a list. Next up, we have your 2 main attackers in the deck, being Rayquaza EX, the guy we're all about in this video, and an old friend, Reshiram from Black and White. Rayquaza EX is who you really want to be attacking with, mainly since you can abuse and reuse the energy attachments Emboar gives you to keep outputting as much damage as possible turn after turn. However, if you feel it would be too risky to attack with an EX at the time, then Reshiram is your backup attacker who can still hit hard for 3 energy and 2-shot most EXs out there, while only giving up the 1 prize. 120 damage turn after turn is nothing to shy away from, and can keep the pressure on your opponent while you set up your board further and prepare for a larger, more important KO with Rayquaza later on. The fact that it only gives up 1 prize can really help you out in crucial stages of the game. Next up is a familiar face already, Emboar. You run a stage 2 in this deck, so getting Emboar in here is vital as it can grab you those basics you need on turn 1 to potentially evolve into Sage Stews via Rare Candy on turn 2. Not always the situation, but if you're holding the means to grab the turn 2 stage 2, then Emboar helps you to get those basics onto the field, ready for the play. 3 may seem a little bit excessive, but when you need those basics out early on, Emboar's your guy. Onto the trainer cards now, and I'm not going to go through each one because we have another list to look at, but I will go over some of the deck specific choices I've made for the particular list. The first major point is only having 3 Pokemon catcher, when I've said in so many other episodes that 4 is a must, but in this deck I've actually had to make an exception. Because of Emboar's unique ability to get a lot of energy into play in a single turn to give Rayquaza's attack incredible strength, you may not need catcher as much because you'll almost always be able to take the KO right in front of you, as Rayquaza's attack has an unlimited damage output. You still want the option of being able to choose to KO bigger threats, which is why it's still in here at 3, but I thought I'd explain why there wasn't 4. The next card is 3 energy retrieval because unlike Electric, you can't get energy back from the discard pile with Emboar. He just lets you attach the energy you have in hand, and with Fisherman gone, the only efficient way to do this is by using this card. You can play it multiple times per turn if resources allow, and you can get a nice chunk of energy into your hand for big attacks the same turn. I would even consider bumping this up to 4 if you still need that recovery of energy later on in the game. 2 Super Rod is also to help out with your discarding of energy and can level out your forced use of Heavy Juniper in a deck that focuses around a stage 2. You can also get back your energy and discarded Pokemon into the deck, ready to search out in the same turn. 2 Heavy Ball and 2 Ultra Ball seems to be a nice number since you can fill in the rest of your space you have with other search to cater for which attackers you decide to have. Heavy Ball grabs your Pignites and Emboars to get those onto the field as quick as possible, and Ultra Ball grabs you the rest of your attackers that aren't very heavy. The list is finished off with 10 Fire Energy and 4 Lightning, which I feel is a nice amount to have enough energy to last through the game, and the Lightning energy is going to be staying in play most of the time anyway, so you don't need a huge amount of those. And that's pretty much it for the Emboar list. Emboar has a reputation for being clunky, and it's still the case when you start hitting the late game, as you can start to run out of energy, but if you can get the build right, you may not be going to the late game with these hard hitting Pokemon. Speaking of hard hitting, a couple of other attackers you could try in here include both Reshiram and Entei EX, both huge HP attackers that also offer different options to your strategy. Reshiram offers the big 150 attack but is very risky, and Entei is definitely worth trying as it can hit for a solid 90 while conserving your energy later on, definitely ones to try out. The next list we're going to look at is what I believe to be the better of the 2 decks, and is focused around Electric being the accelerator of lightning energy to power up Rayquaza's attack. This list is actually more like a Zekrom Electric list, altered for the new format, as it will still be a great deck, and Rayquaza just adds an extra element to it, similar to the way Emboar list ran. We start off with 4-3 Electric, which is the standard for any Eels lists even now. Dynamo is still a very weak basic to have in a deck even in the new format, and can still easily be KO'd early on, so 4 of those are needed, and you could even go up to 4 Electrics too, since we can only use Super Rod once per game. Having 4 Electrics can get you out of trouble when they're hitting the discard pile fast, or prizes haven't treated you that well. It can also help you draw into them easier during the game, and you can use your ball engine for other Pokemon this way. Next up are your Rayquazas, and this list also has 2 of them, as it is a very nice attacker in this deck. As mentioned earlier, the way it combos so well with Dynamotor makes it so good in here, as you can attach the amount of energy needed for the KO and recycle them later on with Dynamotor and then hit heavy again. Getting 3 or more lightning energy onto this guy isn't going to be too hard, and bearing in mind that this means you can hit for 180 or over 200 damage, this is incredible. Rayquaza gives you the means to one-hit KO any Pokemon in the current game in a single attack, and you could really swing a game into your favour out of nowhere. However, enough about Rayquaza and on to the next Pokemon in the list, which is Emboar. We talked quite a bit about Emboar last episode and just now from the Emboar list, and is a much nicer resource in this deck, as it not only gives you a way to search out your very fragile Dynamos from the get-go, but it also gives you a very handy free retreater to send up after suffering a KO, so that you can charge up your attacker of choice through Dynamotor. This is invaluable in a deck that involves Electric, as I'm sure most of you Eel players know, but having this resource included in a Pokemon that also boosts your consistency is even better. Your next Pokemon is the ever familiar regular Zekrom from Black and White, and is in here because of a similar reason to why Reshiram was in the previous list. It's a really great attacker that only gives up 1 prize when getting KO'd. Being able to deal 120 damage fairly easily at any point in the game is going to be devastating to your opponent when they can only take the 1 prize, and you can set up an EX KO fairly easily the following turn. Zekrom also benefits well from Eviolite, also featuring in the list, and makes it harder for your opponent to KO, even after a Bolt Strike or two. Your last Pokemon in the list is Mewtwo EX, as it is still such a great attacker, even with Sigilyph coming out. It can get cheap prizes in the early game and works well with Catcher later on for some more creative KOs, even if there is a Sigilyph on the opponent's side of the field. Even when not running double colourless, this guy can dish out painful KOs to the opponent and keep them on edge as they find their own Mewtwo to get the revenge KO or another Sigilyph to stall. Still a great EX to keep in your deck if your strategy can fully adapt for it. Onto the notable trainer cards now, and it should already look fairly familiar to those of you that have run Zekrom Eels in the past, and not much has changed for the skeleton. I've chosen Bianca over Cheren for this list, as Bianca can make the most of you discarding cards with Ultra Ball, ideally those energy cards, but Cheren is still an option if you like to conserve your resources a little bit more. Maximum Level Ball and 2 Ultra Ball aren't absolutely necessary in the list, but I feel that with the space, you should consider running this as it is so consistent at getting your eels and attackers out as soon as possible, and with the help of Emolga, it can all happen so much faster. Emolga can also be searched out with Level Ball as well as your entire eel line, and the rest of your attackers will either be called for by Emolga or searched out with Ultra Ball while hopefully discarding energy. 2 Skyro Bridge and 2 Switch can be changed up depending on which card you like the best. You could always take out all of the Sky Arrow and max out Switch, but I feel that being able to cycle Rayquaza's turn after turn through Sky Arrow Bridge is a really nice touch. Do be careful though, as eels will be getting dragged into the active spot if your opponent is looking to stall, and you don't run double colourless, so bump up the switch count if you're feeling a little exposed to that. 2 Eviolite does what it always has done by keeping your basic attackers alive for longer, as it buffers Zekrom's self-damage, protects Mewtwo from further X-Balls or Sigilyphs to avoid KOs, and also gives your opponent a Rayquaza problem if they don't run any Dragon types themselves. 2 Energy Surge is there to keep consistency up in the early stages of the game, and can net you the initial fire energy you need in this stage of the game to get attacking as soon as possible, as you don't play many fire energy altogether. The last card is a self-explanatory Super Rod. 1 copy cards aren't as good as they used to be in previous times, but a single Super Rod is always going to be handy later on in the game to get crucial Pokemon and energy into the deck for reuse to try and win out the game. A simple and straightforward inclusion. We finish up the skeleton list with 9 lightning and 4 fire. You can get away with 9 lightning because you have easier access to your discarded energy through electric, and 4 fire should be enough as you do play the 2 energy search in the deck to fish them out when they're needed. Overall, the list is basically a more developed Zekrom Eels deck, just modified for the rotation and altered slightly to cater for Rayquaza EX, the new attacker on the block. However, you do have more space for attackers, and you could also consider Raikou EX, as this Pokemon can take full advantage of Sky Arrow Bridge being in play, as well as take cheap prizes when you need them the most. And you could also think about adding in other creative attackers such as Zapdos from Next Destinies, or the possible new Rayquaza, which was mentioned in the last episode, but we need to wait to see if that will be coming in our next set or not. And that is all you need to know about Rayquaza EX and the 2 decks it is most likely going to feature in when Battle Roads finally hit in September. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode, and please comment down below with all the ideas you have for the Black and White onwards format, or any further additions you can make to the lists featured this week. Thanks for watching this week's episode, and a huge thanks to all my new subscribers, as I managed to hit 2,900 subscribers just the other day. Please leave a comment, leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already, and make sure you have a great weekend.